Well, friends, welcome to Q on Q. We're glad you're with us this week. First, I want to give you an apology and a thank you. We were unable to record an episode last week. I've been dealing with some throat issues, some issues with my voice going in and out, and just feeling some clogging and some things. I see a specialist this week, so I greatly appreciate your thoughts and prayers as I have this taken care of, but appreciate your patience more than anything. One of my big goals for 2026 was to not really miss a week in the midst of a series, but got sidelined a little bit last week. But we're back and appreciate you tuning in to this third part of our new series for 2026. Well, before we get into it, man, it's cold outside. I don't know where you are listening at, but where we are in the northeast part of the United States, it has been cold. So cold. It was 17 below zero in my backyard last night. Looking forward to that getting a little warmer in the next few days. We've had some school closures, some delays, but hopefully we're on the flip side of that. And we're going to see a little bit of fixing in the days to come. If you have been listening during this series, in the past couple of episodes, we have been talking about renewal, what it means to be restored, and how renewal begins quietly in the way we think. And when our minds start to shift, clarity starts to come back. But clarity doesn't stay abstract for too long. Eventually, renewed thinking asks a deeper question: what is this shaping me toward? Because when the mind begins to renew, it naturally leads us to purpose. How we think influences pretty much everything: how we choose, how we prioritize, and how we move forward. Renewal isn't meant to stop at perspective, it's meant to guide direction. And that is where today's conversation is going to start. There are moments when purpose doesn't disappear, it just, really, for lack of a better term, loses its sharpness. You still show up, you still do the work, you still carry responsibility, but something just doesn't feel right. What once felt clear now feels heavy. What once felt meaningful now just feels like a routine or something mechanical. And the hardest part is that nothing obvious is wrong, yet you know something just isn't quite right. Purpose often blurs, not because we've let it go, but because life piles on top of it. Maybe it's more expectations or tighter schedules or people relying on us. But over time, purpose can quietly shift from something we live from into something we simply carry. And when that happens, even good work can start to feel draining instead of life giving. For many of us, this blur shows up when our calling turns into a routine. We remember why we started something, but we're not sure that reason is still driving us. The days get filled with motion, but the meaning feels so far away. We confuse faithfulness with fatigue, assuming that feeling worn down is just part of doing what we're supposed to do. What's often overlooked is that purpose isn't something we manufacture, it's something we receive. At its core, purpose is breathed from God. It's shaped by His design, not just our ambition. When purpose drifts, it's not always because we've done something wrong. Sometimes it's because we've carried it too long without returning it to its source. So if purpose feels unclear right now, let's be reassuring about something. Confusion is not failure. Blurriness is not disobedience. These things are often a signal, a gentle nudge that some renewal is needed. And renewal doesn't mean starting over, it means returning to the breath that first gave life to your purpose. And that, my friends, is the focus of this episode. Our society seems to focus so much on things and materialistic stuff. We tend to define purpose by what we produce. Maybe it's the goals we hit, or the roles we hold, or the boxes we check. If we're moving forward, staying busy, we assume we're living on purpose. But productivity and purpose are not the same thing. And confusing the two is one of the fastest ways purpose can start to blur for us. There's a powerful example of this in Viktor Frankl's memoir, Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl was a psychiatrist and a Holocaust survivor who observed something striking while imprisoned in concentration camps. People could survive unimaginable suffering if they believed their life still held meaning. Purpose, for Frankl, wasn't tied to success or comfort or accomplishment. It was rooted in why someone continued to live, love, and endure, even when everything else was stripped away. Frankl wrote this: "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Whew. Think about that for a minute. That statement almost reframes purpose entirely. Purpose isn't about what's happening around us, it's about what's anchoring us underneath. You can be effective and still feel empty. You can be accomplishing a great deal of things and still feel disconnected. Because purpose lives deeper than output. And this is where many of us find ourselves missing the boat. We're doing meaningful work, maybe even work we once prayed for, but we're not doing it connected to its original why. The motion continues, but the meaning has faded or is fading. And instead of pausing to realign, we assume the solution is just to do more effort, more discipline, more results, and then we think things will fix themselves. I'm a school teacher, and I will say that being a teacher is hard, but it's such a rewarding profession for me. I never entered teaching for personal accolades or for the summertime breaks or for whatever reasons people say teachers go into education. But there's a question that gets asked often to us, especially when teachers feel stretched thin or burned out. What is your why? It's not asked to pressure anybody into working harder. It's asked to help people remember why they started this job in the first place. Not the title, not the lesson plans, not the meetings, but the deeper meaning that once made the work feel meaningful. Think about that in your own life for a minute. When that why gets buried under demands and deadlines, even the best teachers can start to feel disconnected from the very thing they love. Renewing our purpose doesn't usually require changing everything. More often, it requires just a recentering of what already exists. It's not about abandoning your calling or leaving your career or your commitments. It's about returning to the intention beneath them. Purpose is the reason beneath the role, the motivation beneath the motion. From a spiritual perspective, this makes complete and total sense. Because if purpose is God breathed, then it isn't sustained by performance alone, it is sustained by connection, returning again and again to the source that gave it meaning in the first place. When we drift from that source, even good work can start to feel empty or hollow. So the question here isn't, am I busy or am I successful? The deeper question is, am I aligned? Because purpose doesn't shout through achievements, it whispers through meaning. And when we learn to listen again, renewal begins to take shape. When we start listening for that whisper of meaning, it often leads us straight to the idea of calling, the place where purpose takes on form and direction. Calling is how alignment shows up in real life. It really is purpose expressed through our work, through our relationships, or our daily responsibilities, or service to others. And when alignment is clear, our calling feels life giving. Calling, though, does have a way of changing or modifying over time, not all at once, but gradually. Because what once felt like an invitation can slowly become an obligation. The work doesn't change, the responsibilities don't disappear, but the posture of the heart does. Instead of being fueled by meaning, we start running on expectation. And pressure often enters when calling becomes tied to performance. We start to measure our worth by outcomes or feedback or approval of others. But comparison creeps in quietly. And we start observing and watching how others are doing it, how well they're doing it, how far they've gone. And before we realize it, we are no longer responding to a call. We're just trying to keep up. Now, I think fear plays a role here too. A fear of letting people down, or a fear of wasting potential, or maybe even one of stepping back when others expect us to push forward. These fears don't announce themselves, they just show up. Maybe it's tension, or urging, or a constant sense that rest is undeserved. Even meaningful work can become heavy when it's carried by fear instead of purpose. And this is where burnout often begins. Not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing the right things for the wrong reasons. The work may still matter deeply, but the source has shifted. When calling is driven by pressure, it drains rather than sustains. We keep going, but the joy that once accompanied that work slowly fades. There's something important to recognize here. Good work still needs renewal. Just because something started in a healthy place doesn't mean it stays there automatically. Purpose, especially when it's God breathed, was never meant to be powered by constant striving. It was meant to flow from connection, from trust, and alignment. And when calling turns into pressure, it's not a sign that you failed. It's often a sign that renewal is needed at the source. A reminder that purpose doesn't demand everything from you. It invites you to walk with intention. And when that invitation is reclaimed, the weight begins to lift. Not because the work disappears, but because the reason beneath it is restored. At some point, renewal of purpose always leads us to a quieter, more honest question. Not what we're doing, but why? Beneath the responsibilities, under the expectations, and even the calling itself, there's a deeper motivation shaping our direction. And until we name that motivation quietly drives everything. That's where the question matters. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Really? Not the polished answer, not the one that sounds responsible or faithful, the honest one. Why am I doing what I'm doing? The answer that surfaces when no one else is listening. Purpose and its renewal begins with truth, not correction. Scripture points us towards this kind of inward examination without turning it into shame. Commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. That verse from Proverbs. The emphasis isn't on perfect plans, it's on alignment. When intention is brought into the open, direction begins to steady. Look at this verse from Colossians 3. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. It's not a call to work harder. It's an invitation to work from the right place. Because when purpose is rooted in approval or fear, the work becomes heavy. When it's rooted in alignment, that same work feels so much lighter. And asking this question doesn't mean something is wrong with what you're doing. Often it means something is right and worth protecting. Renewal doesn't require abandoning calling, it requires clarifying motivation. It's the difference between striving to prove something and serving from a place of peace. I know this kind of reflection can feel uncomfortable at first. That's okay. Honest questions tend to unsettle before they clarify, but they also create space. Space for renewal, for freedom, and for purpose to return to its proper place. When the why beneath the work is renewed, the work itself doesn't have to change to feel different, because alignment has a way of restoring meaning without rewriting the entire story. So once we begin to clarify the why beneath our work, the next question becomes, how do we live that purpose out without losing ourselves in the process? Because alignment doesn't automatically remove responsibility, it does change how responsibility is carried. This is where obedience comes into the conversation, not as pressure, but as a posture. Obedience often gets misunderstood as constant output or endless availability. but obedience was never meant to drain us of life. When it's rooted in renewed purpose, obedience becomes steady instead of frantic. It becomes faithful instead of frantic. It becomes intentional instead of being exhausting. It allows us to show up fully without feeling like everything depends on us. Burnout usually isn't the result of disobedience. It's often the result of obedience disconnected from that renewal. I know that might seem like a confusing pattern to follow, but think of it this way. When we say yes without discernment, or we equate faithfulness with exhaustion, we begin to live as though rest is optional or even undeserved. But over time, even meaningful work becomes unsustainable when there's no room to breathe. Something it took me a long time to hear, and it was a hard learn, was that there's a quiet wisdom in recognizing that limits are not failures. Boundaries don't signal a lack of commitment, they protect what we're called to steward. Purpose that is God breathed doesn't demand constant striving, it invites trust. Trust that saying no can be as faithful as saying yes, and that rest can be an act of obedience too. A renewed sense of purpose helps us act thoughtfully instead of always feeling rushed or pressured. It allows us to move at a pace that sustains us rather than depleting us. Because when purpose is clear, we no longer feel the need to prove ourselves through constant motion. We can work faithfully and still leave space for rest, reflection, and joy. When obedience flows from alignment instead of pressure, something shifts. The work remains important, but it no longer owns us. And in that freedom, purpose becomes something we walk in, not something that weighs us down. You might not just wake up one morning feeling like your purpose has been fully restored. You'll probably notice it in the quieter moments when the work feels slightly lighter, or when you stop questioning every decision or you realize that you are no longer carrying the same pressure. And while renewal is a process, there are real ways to notice when it's beginning. An early sign of renewed purpose is a change in your emotional weight. That work may still be challenging, but it's no longer feeling suffocating. Pay attention to how you feel at the end of the day, not just how productive it was. Pay attention to the moments when you feel rushed, resentful, or unusually tired. Not to judge them, but to learn from them. A useful step here is to pause once a week and ask yourself, what drained me this week and what gave me energy? Because purpose often reveals itself through what restores rather than what exhausts. Another step, revisit your why in real time. When you start a task, especially one you've done 100 times, pause and remind yourself why it matters. Not the external reason, but the deeper one. Doesn't have to be spoken out loud, and it certainly shouldn't be the canned answer everybody's expecting, but it's enough to quietly reconnect the work to meaning. You might also consider where you're saying yes automatically. This week, look for one place to slow your response. Give yourself permission to reflect before committing, not because you don't care, but because your purpose deserves thoughtful stewardship. Purpose isn't threatened by reflection, it's strengthened by it. Another way to participate in renewal is by naming your purpose in plain language. Now, I'm not talking about making a big mission statement here, just a sentence you can return to. Maybe it's something like, I'm doing this to stay faithful and serve well. Writing this down and revisiting it when things feel heavy can really quickly and quietly recenter your direction. It's also helpful to pay attention to patterns in your life rather than isolated moments. Remember that one bad day doesn't mean that your purpose is lost. One good day doesn't mean that it's fully restored. Look for trends that happen over time. A practical habit here is to check in monthly and ask yourself, am I moving towards alignment, even slowly? Because remember, renewal is often gradual and progress deserves recognition. Rather than trying to solve your purpose all at once, think about how you want to carry it this week. Renewal doesn't ask for big declarations or major changes. It invites awareness. So instead of asking, what am I supposed to do next? Start with a quieter question like, how am I showing up to what's already in front of me? Maybe you could end each day with a simple question. What felt aligned today and what didn't? Don't overanalyze it. Let patterns emerge naturally. And over time, they'll tell you more about your purpose than any single moment ever could. As you practice this kind of attentiveness this week, you might notice something else begins to surface: desire. Not just obligation or responsibility, but what you care about, what moves you, and what still matters deeply. That's not accidental. Every small act of alignment makes space for the next, and as purpose continues to steady, it prepares the ground for something even deeper: the renewal of the heart. And friends, that's where we are headed next. Because once purpose starts to steady, the next question isn't just what you're called to do, it's what you love, what you carry, and what shapes your motivation from the inside out. So next time, we're going to step into renewing the heart and explore what happens when our purpose and our inner life begin to align once more. Well, that's all for this week's episode of Q on Q. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you back here next time when we'll have more for you on Q.